Today on the podcast, we're talking the streetcar, public transportation, and autonomous vehicles. This is the Kansas City Podcast. Welcome to the Kansas City Podcast. I'm your host, Cole Lindbergh. Many of you know me from my recent appearance on Kansas City's fastest growing taco podcast, Taco the Town. And if not, it's nice to meet you. You know, each week here on the Kansas City Podcast, we are joined by a one-of-a-kind KC native for a conversation on life in the city of fountains. And I am very excited today. I'm very excited about today's guest. We've got a lot to talk about. You know, each week on the show when we take the KC quiz, I always ask how people feel about the streetcar. And today, I have a streetcar advocate here on the show. So we're going to be talking streetcar, Kansas City transportation. Please welcome to the Kansas City Podcast, David Johnson. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Cole.
No. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. So I want to get... I have a lot of questions streetcar related. I have a lot of questions public transportation related. But I think I want to start with is that how was your initial involvement into Kansas City transportation? Or because I know that you're like a big, not only streetcar advocate, but I know that you have had thoughts and opinions on
just about everything.
Yeah, everything for a long time. So what? Tell me about your insight into that and how that all began.
So I wasn't much of a public transit user until I moved downtown. But actually just after that, I started a blog with my friend Jeff called kclightrail.com. And we started that in direct response to the 2006 ballot initiative from Clay Chastain that passed very unexpectedly. And I have a journalism degree and background in printing and publishing, and so... and Jeff just likes to make trouble. And so we thought, well, let's do a blog about this issue. And then it blossomed into, I found a new passion. Yeah. And so coupling that with, we had had the Max line opened in the Kansas City's first Max line opened in 2005. And I was living downtown and started using that. And so it just all fell into place. Yeah. And for a long time, I wrote anonymously.
Okay. You were scared?
Well, no, I was not, it wasn't so much advocacy early on. It was like, this is a cool story. Let's give this some time and focus because the media kind of does a thing and then they forget about it and they come back, right? Yeah. And then it became more advocacy journalism. As I realized how useful and beneficial public transportation could be, and how we've sort of screwed up almost every opportunity we had to do better, and had a system that was big and then let it kind of wither on the vine. And so, and then that seemed to correlate with Kansas City's sort of economic success, right? Yeah. So public transportation in Kansas City peaked in like the 20s and kind of carried on through World War II, and then just fell off the map.
Right.
And that coincided with our investment in highways and suburbia and white flight out to the suburbs, and the transit system didn't go out with those people. It kind of stayed put, and then, like I said, withered on the vine. And then, fast forward to, I don't know, the 70s and 80s, and we sort of tinkered with stuff. And then in the 90s, the city put a big plan in front of voters that was rail-based, and then it just went down in flames. And so, we've been kind of hammering...
Kind of itching our way back, maybe, to a point?
No, I think what the conversation now is, we don't compete well with our peer cities on an economic level. And... we do okay, but we're certainly not exceeding any of them. In fact, we used to be peers with some larger cities like Denver and Dallas, and now we're Des Moines, St. Louis, and so I would rather us be growing than staying kind of mid-pack. And I feel like an investment in public transportation is the way to go. Anyway, so back to how I got to where I'm at.
No, this is all fascinating. Keep going. You're killing it.
The blog sort of became hard to do, or I got lazy, or both. And then Twitter came around in 2009, right? Yes. And so I started spending a lot more time. At the time, it was called microblogging. I'm like, well, hey, what a great transition. I have a short attention span.
Yeah.
And so I basically moved the blog onto Twitter, and in essence came out shortly afterwards. My identity was no longer a secret. I didn't care.
Yeah.
And built a platform there. And then in late 2010, 2010, the city started talking about a streetcar. Yeah. A sort of very, very, very scaled down version of previous larger light rail plans. And in early 2011, a couple of other transit advocates, people who were much more serious about advocacy in general in that space, approached me and my friend Matt Staub and said, look, this is a really small proposal with a targeted funding district that you both live and work in.
Yeah.
You two should get directly involved versus just like harping from
from
Twitter and make it happen. Help make it happen. And so we said, okay, sure. So we started a group called Streetcar Neighbors, very loose affiliation of downtown residents because, as you know, the starter line is only downtown, right?
Right.
And so it's connecting 3 neighborhoods, and we stitched together the 3 neighborhood groups that weren't used to working together: River Market, downtown proper, and then Crossroads. And me being a Crossroads, and Matt being River Market. And so through that, we basically ended up sort of stumbling into a messaging gap that the city had left when they started the project. And then it just blew up from there. And then the mayor asked me to serve on a governance task force to build the governance structure around the streetcar, because the city was the owner.
Yeah.
And that turned into a role on the Streetcar Authority board, which was going to does oversee the streetcar's operation on the city's behalf as a sort of agreement with the people who pay into the district, right? So almost all of the funding for the streetcar comes from downtown.
Yeah.
So sales tax and special assessments on property, including my own. And so the city thought, well, we should give those ratepayers, in essence, hand them the keys and say, look, you have all the policy and operational stuff. Yeah. We're still owning the asset because we're issuing, the bonds on it and everything and constructing it.
Yeah.
But we feel like, you're paying, a significant share. You just run it and do good.
Yeah.
And so, it's interesting model. It's not unique. There are other cities that do this. They kind of focus around streetcar systems. So we were basing it on something that had been done.
Yeah.
But we kind of put our own spin on it, and it's been really successful. So it's kind of a public-private partnership.
Yeah.
And really proud of the way it would not look and feel and operate the way it does today if it weren't a public-private partnership, and I really believe that.
I think that shows in writing it too. I mean,
how so? I'm curious.
Well, I feel like it's will. So I have very mixed opinions on all of it because I feel like it's very well integrated into the area. Good. Like where the stops are, everything. Like it makes sense. Like it makes sense that, that's where they would be at. It makes sense that, it blends well with neighborhood. You can tell that somebody didn't just come in and say, oh, we're going to do, like, you can tell a lot of planning.
Good, because it's millions of dollars of planning and engineering that came to those conclusions.
So I mean, you can definitely, I can definitely feel that, Now, as someone, I'm a Northlander. Okay, so I live up north.
I won't hold that against you.
Yeah, that's fine. Don't worry about it. And, for me, since I'm not someone who lives downtown and I'm not someone that would normally regularly use the streetcar, that's where kind of, to me, it's part of me is like, I would love for the streetcar to extend up into North Kansas City, and like kind of extend out and everything. But right now, I kind of feel like I think it's great for tourists. I think that if someone is going to Union Station in the morning, and they're checking it out, and then they're going to go up the streetcar and check out River Mart, go eat. Like, I feel like there's tons of different opportunities along the way, but it hasn't totally started to affect my life yet.
Yeah. I mean, it would be like you saying does Main Street affect your life today?
Right.
And the answer would be no, because
Yeah.
Main Street doesn't go to the Northland.
That's
right. It may in some weird way, but it doesn't. So
through bypasses.
Right.
Yeah.
So and the other thing to remember about downtown is that's where a lot of tourists go now, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that the streetcar is downtown and there are tourists downtown,
Yeah.
ergo tourists ride the streetcar. It's not something inherent about the streetcar.
Yeah.
In fact, tourists don't make up the majority of riders because tourists don't make up the majority of people circulating downtown. It's people who live and work downtown that do. And we just had a study commissioned that kind of shows that.
That's great.
Yeah. So now most people's interaction, if they don't live or work downtown, would be on a weekend when the number of tourist riders or people who are not from the area is higher. But you go trust me, ask anyone who rides at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, you will not see tourists unless it's like Big 12 week, right?
I got you, yeah.
In fact, you'll see, a slice of humanity that shows all the people that are circulating downtown. I mean, from people commuting to work, and that is a thing, even though it's short, and people, just getting out of the cold because it's free to ride. And there's no problem with that. If you're minding your own business, there's no reason you can't just get on the streetcar, stay warm, go to a couple blocks, and go on about your day. It's a public amenity.
So I mean, you've had basically a 12-year journey now. I mean, if you're going back to 2006, so when the streetcar finally, when they started building it and it got approved and, you were part of all these authorities that were making sure everything was going great. I mean, did you feel this sense of accomplishment or?
Yeah. I mean,
I mean, I can only imagine you did, but.
Yeah, I tend to be a little modest about it, but when construction started, I really felt, braggers' rights because, and I did walking tours. I did probably, almost 2 years of walking tours, even when there was nothing to look at because people, it was so new and abstract before construction started. And people didn't know, how's it going to go here? And, when it gets to Union Station, does it have to, turn in a circle?
Right,
or does it just, fly around?
How does the switch track work?
Yeah, right. So, as we learned those things about the design and, those became sort of, firm, I could explain that. And we could explain about the vehicles and how big they are and how you don't want to walk in front of one because they can't stop as fast as a car, but they'll be on tracks, so they're not going to veer like cars do all the time, veer off the road and run into people and things. So, and they'll have level boarding, and so you can take your bike on and a wheelchair and a stroller, and it'll be very easy. And then at some point we decided it was going to be free to ride.
That's the type of care that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You can tell it's very ADA accessible. You can get right. I was on it when I was on it. I had multiple people with bikes. There were multiple individuals that got on, electric wheelchairs stuff. I was like, man, it's really easy not only to access and get on, but I mean, it's also, you can tell that people are using it and taking care and getting on and everything.
And that's the public-private partnership that I think that if it was just the city, and I'm not bagging on the city, that they're smart people that are doing their jobs and engineering and building stuff every day in all kinds of ways, right? But this was it was so important to me personally that I felt, especially the accessibility stuff. Yeah. Because my friend Mike lives in the River Market and is in a motorized wheelchair, right? And he likes to take Amtrak because that's a way for him to get around because he can't drive. I mean, he has one of those vans, but he likes the freedom of just being roll on, roll off, and go somewhere. And so for him to get from River Market to Union Station to get on Amtrak and go to St. Louis was like a really big ordeal.
Like that.
The moment the first time he contacted me and said, Dave, I got on the streetcar at River Market and rolled right on and rolled right on Amtrak, it just felt like I had freedom. Yeah. And I'm starting to tear up a little bit because that really drove me with that part of the project, because as much as you can say that we can do other things to get people around, try to put Mike in an Uber. It doesn't work.
Yeah, it doesn't happen.
And even with a bus, as much as we've made strides to make buses accessible, he has to wait for a ramp to deploy. The bus has to wait longer than any other able-bodied person would make it wait. And that's basically kind of almost dehumanizing. And so this really is an equity thing for people with mobility issues. And when I talk about that, nobody can argue with it, right? So because if you've ever known anybody in a wheelchair with a mobility issue, you know how hard it can be. And then with the bike thing, I'm not much of a cyclist myself, but I recognize that the people who advocate for that, we have a lot in common. There's a lot of common ground, and we're also in the minority. So from the very beginning, I said we have to have, this has to work really well with bikes. This can be a trip extender for bikes as well as pedestrians. And so one of the first tests we did was to invite the bike community to ride before it was open to the public. And so they could see how easy it was to roll their bikes on. And we had 30 bikes on the streetcar at once. It was pretty insane. And, they got it. And they're like, well, this makes sense now, because they were worried about the tracks in the street, which is legit, right?
Yeah.
That can present, a problem if you're not careful, like a lot of things in the roadway. And so I think we dispelled a lot of that. A lot of cities haven't had that good relationship with the cycling community that we have. And I think it's because, I don't want to take total responsibility, but I saw early on that I had to prove a benefit to them, and I think we did.
When was the decision made to make it free?
So also happy to be part of that, because that was an operational decision that the Streetcar Authority made, and I was on the board at the time. And it was a very simple calculation. So the consultant said, look, here's what it costs to collect a fare. You have to buy equipment, specialized equipment. You can't just use an off-the-shelf like Raspberry Pi and an SD card and whatever. Like, it's got to be...
I think of going to Chicago and you get the card.
That stuff's expensive. Yeah. Super expensive.
And you'd have to put one at every single stop.
And because the rest of the system right now is all bus-based, we don't have a major fare collection system that people are used to when they go to Chicago, right? So we would have to acquire all that specifically for the 2-mile streetcar. And it was like $1 million or something.
Outlandish.
So that's just the upfront cost, right? And then there was the annual cost of just collecting cash, right? Because the reason if you do a fare, you have to accept cash. It's an equity thing, right? And so the cost of collecting cash is high relative to the amount that you can actually get from someone who would be willing to pay to ride your streetcar.
Right.
So the assumption was like $1, right, for the fare. And it was going to cost almost as much to collect the fare than we would have collected in actual revenue, aside from the capital cost, right? So $1 million, take that off the table for the capital, and then every year it was going to cost us $350,000 to handle a bunch of dollars.
Right.
And then we would only get $500,000 in revenue, maybe, right? Because we were predicting a lower ridership number than we were actually seeing. And so it just didn't wash. We were like, okay, well, if it's going to cost us $350,000 and we're only going to get $500,000, why bother at all? Maybe we'll get more riders. Well, what happened? We got I was going to say shit. Well, anyway, we got a lot more riders. Sorry, you can maybe edit out the expletive or bleep it, whatever.
It's okay. We have the E, explicit.
Okay, good. I feel much better about that. So, we have a lot more riders, and I think almost everyone acknowledges that the lack of a fare makes the system easier to use, ergo more riders, ergo more economic development. The sales tax receipts in the district are off the chart, 3 times higher than what the city-wide sales taxes are generating. And everyone predicted that it would be a big damper on downtown's economy, the people who didn't want the street. Right. So none of that happened. Businesses, retail, restaurants doing well. They're popping up. I mean, how many restaurants and breweries and whatever have you seen pop up since 2016, right?
Yeah.
And that was happening all through construction. That was what blew my mind, is businesses were opening on the route during the peak of construction. And people were just so excited. They were... They knew, especially people who aren't from here,
yeah.
knew that there would be a payoff, and I think by all measures there has been.
So you mentioned the metrics that, like it's the growth, it blew everyone away,
Right.
basically. Can you talk to kind of what not only what they see in the future, for it, but also, more of that? Does the growth basically say, hey, we need to add more? This makes sense. Like now we show that
Add more streetcar?
Yeah. We
Yeah.
show that the taxes are higher. We show that this is working. Is it add more, or is there just another whole thing of loopholes to go through to add to it? Because I think that's when people are on the show, when I talk to them and I say more streetcar, everyone says, I would love more streetcar, but only if it gets to where I am.
Right. Sure.
And also, I would love more streetcar if it went down to, let's say, Waldo, or, it went to Westport, if it made its way around. I mean, everyone seems to be kind of like, okay, this is actually a really cool thing, but why did they only do 2 miles? Why, why was it just 2 miles?
So going way back to 2009, 2010, when the city said, we're going to do 2 miles and that's it because we have to prove ourselves.
Yeah,
right?
you got to prove your concept.
Back then, everyone thought that it was, they also thought, well, hey, it's really short. But if you were making that kind of gamble, $100 million, right?
Yeah.
Which, of course, 60-something of it is actual local money. But the gamble seemed really high.
Yeah.
And so, the projects like this do sputter. They eventually almost always make sense financially, but out of the gate, there's a couple of streetcar examples that I can mention that I won't today, but that haven't done so well. Couple years, out of the gate. So, you have to be very cautious, and the city naturally is cautious. It's public money.
Right.
You want to not waste it. So, even though this was a special district. So I think people just said, well, look, you've got, it's a relatively risky proposition. We're not a big transit culture here. So let's proceed with caution. And 2 miles it had the political support because downtown was always off the chart voting yes for everything. And you had a community that was willing to accept the challenges of construction and paying for it.
Yeah.
Sort of without question.
Right.
I shouldn't say without question, but the voters who would be approving the district were
Your
sort of without question.
The individuals that you live with here,
Right.
were
The
all
people
like, yes.
who don't live downtown, that own property and have business interests, they were a little bit harder to bring along. But now, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find someone who said it was a really bad idea to do, and usually those people are opposed to the expansion because they don't want to pay.
Yeah.
But if you find someone who isn't going to pay for the expansion and has maybe interacted with the streetcar once in their life, they're like, yeah, it's a good thing. Kind of like what you were saying.
Yeah,
right? Yeah. And they want a piece of it. And the problem is it's so expensive.
Yeah.
So, and it escalates sort of forever. So, it'll never be $50 million a mile again, ever.
Right.
So whenever we do it, it's going to be 65, maybe 70. I don't know.
Yeah.
But the price of steel and concrete and trains and all this stuff is always changing and escalating. And it's never going to be cheaper. So, I would be fine, and this is actually probably going to shock you. I would be fine if we never built any more streetcar other than River to UMKC.
Wow. Okay.
Because
That does surprise me.
yeah, so the reason is if you did more than that, you would have to have a much larger pool of resources, meaning a citywide or regional vote. But once you do that, once you make the decision to fund streetcar with a citywide or regional vote, then everybody wants a piece. Then it becomes all about streetcar and not about serving people furder out, right?
Gotcha.
Because we're so big. So we like to say Kansas City's 319 square miles. That's just Kansas City, Missouri.
Right.
The region is, I don't even know how big it
We're
is.
one of the
It's
most spread
huge,
out
right?
cities ever. Yeah.
And the urban core is doing fine. It's actually got density. We say we're really low density in Kansas City, but the urban core has census tracts with like 10,000 people per square mile, right, or something. So that's pretty good for transit. Now, when you get out to 119th and Schweitzer, that's probably going to be a bus for the rest of time, if that, because the economics of serving that few people, with this kind of asset just doesn't compute.
Yeah. So wasn't there a vote on expansion recently?
So we're in the middle of a final election. There's been so many votes. So the
it's
special
hard to keep
district,
track of. They keep
I don't
happening.
blame you. I don't blame you. So we're in the middle of the final vote for the southern expansion, the Main Street extension to UMKC. We're in that process right now. It's a mail-in election that concludes in June.
Okay.
It's a slow motion thing, 14 weeks. And this is the last one, right? So we did the special district downtown. That was 2 elections in 2012, both successful, obviously. We built the line. We had a larger election in 2014 that was backed by the city, and that failed.
Okay.
And that was exactly the logic that I was referring to earlier. The district was so big and the streetcar part was so small that people who were, actually even on that one, people who were close to the streetcar voted no on the east side. But it just kind of collapsed under its own weight. So advocates took the Main Street extension from that and did it on our own.
Gotcha.
Starting in 2016. It was very expensive. We raised all the money from the private sector, about $350,000, which took 2 years of my life, and a lot of uncomfortable meetings with people that I don't normally talk to in corporate offices and stuff. And so those
Did you
elections,
wear a suit?
I would do a jacket.
Okay.
Yes, I'm not a suit person, I mustered the courage to buy a cheap a sports jacket.
I'm going to come in here and ask for money.
Yeah, right. And it was an unusual request. Pay for my election, right? People never ask that. So we finally scraped it all together. And so you're seeing the fruit of that right now. So the final election is happening now. And that will say we will pay for the Main Street extension to UMKC for the local percentage. And then we go get federal money to make the project whole and then build it.
Wow.
That's a very sort of like simplified version of what's going to happen for the next 5 years.
So it's end of March. How's it going?
Good.
How's the response right now?
It's.
Are you confident? Are you optimistic?
Oh yeah. So this corridor was as much of a sure bet as downtown was in 2012. Gotcha. If you look at all the votes we've taken citywide on light rail and transit, the river to Brookside, including even really down to Waldo, they always say yes for everything, right? Yeah. Even if it's not transit, like GeoBond and all the other stuff we voted on. They're very supportive and will pay for new things. And so that's what we're seeing with Streetcar as well.
Cool.
And so even though you hear some cranky people from Midtown and Brookside, they are the vocal minority because we have voting that proves we have in-person voting and mail-in voting and citywide votes from 10 years ago that say, in aggregate, these parts of the community always say yes. So, cry all you want.
Yeah.
We know this will pass, and why is that a bad thing? Because they want to tax themselves to pay for something.
Yeah.
And why should the rest of the city be able to hold Midtown and Plaza back from building Streetcar?
So you've been involved in this 12 years now. You've seen lots of changes. You've seen the creation of the streetcar. Where do you see it 10 years from now? What do you see the future being?
Well, eventually the newness will wear off.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that Kansas City's momentum, which is bigger than Streetcar, right? We're on this wave.
Yeah.
And everyone's kind of, if you've been around, we've had a wave before, and we said, "Oh, wait, the wave's too big. This is not. let's tamper this wave." But I feel like now people are pushing back to that. I mean, it's the provincialism that keeps us from really booming, and I feel like we're going to embrace that.
Yeah.
And the mayor, I think, has been a big part of that. People moving in, a next generation. Who are like, I was raised in the suburbs. I want something different. Why can't the city be vibrant all the time? And we still have suburbs that are healthy too. So, as opposed to one has to win.
Right.
And because we're all in this together, right?
We're all in this together. You're right. Let's all hold hands.
Yeah, right. I mean, it is essentially all the Kansas City economy and all this stealing back and forth across the state line and everything. It's like it's eating away at ourselves. It's not if Overland Park wins, Kansas City has to lose. It can't be that way, right?
Right.
And a little healthy competition is good, but at the end of the day, we need to be competitive as a region. And I feel like we will be competitive as a region against other regions if we invest in transit. So this was the starting point.
Yeah.
The reason I say I'd be happy with no more streetcar between River and UMKC is because that's the spine.
Yeah.
You now have a spine for a regional system that we can afford and touch the Northland and Overland Park and Kearney if we decide, right?
Right.
Because you're not going to spend as much building and you're going to spend more serving. And that's my vision for beyond streetcar.
So 30 years from now?
To answer your actual question, 30 years from now, Kansas City has a robust urban core, healthy suburbs, outer ring and inner ring, because we keep forgetting about those first ring suburbs that are now in decline.
Yeah.
And they're all served by transportation choices, options, right? Yeah. So whether it's a bus, an autonomous vehicle that connects to a bus or shuttle, or streetcars, maybe in more neighbors. I don't know, but
it's funny you mentioned autonomous vehicle. Do you have an opinion on autonomous vehicles?
Oh, I do. Yeah, absolutely.
How do you feel about self-driving cars?
It's the flying car of our era, right?
Yeah.
So you can build a flying car, but they're not being used anywhere, right?
Yeah.
I think we're really close to making it happen, but the curve to get to what the technology can do with how the culture has to adopt, right? So the smartphone was this is a recent example we can use, right? The smartphone was a very easy translation for people to make, right? Yeah. Because everyone had a phone for the most part, and the smartphone could make phone calls, but then it did all this other stuff, right? Yeah. It didn't require you to, it improved your life, but it didn't require you to change your economics, right? Or change your city. It has had impacts on those things, but it didn't require you to make a change up front. And I think AVs require us to kind of think differently about how the technology will be applied, versus just letting it happen to us, which is what happened to the smartphone. Right?
I keep reading these articles about these future articles. These guys that were talking about future and autonomous vehicles and about how, it changes so much from like you get in your car in the middle of the night, you leave in the evening and you rent like a sleeper car. And the car just drives automatically all the way to your destination. You don't have to stop at the Super 8 along the way, and how all of these little things can affect so much of not only the travel industry, but the hotel industry. You could go get a business car, and it pulls up, you go in, it's got like its own Wi-Fi and stuff, and you could do business meetings from the car on the way to your office.
Right.
And the whole thing just kind of, it's scary and exciting all at the same time. But I worry that there are going to be some people that are we are such a car city. We're such a driving city. And I feel like we have so many people here that love to drive their car that I'm worried that there's going to be like this really weird backlash of people like, I would never get...
It's going to be like the guns conversation. Yeah. I guarantee it. So you'll be able to take my F-150 away from me, from my cold dead hands, right? So, and that's what's required for this AV future that the futurists are telling us. Like, for AVs to have an impact on safety, and giving you all your time back, because driving is completely unproductive time, even though we try to make it productive by using our phones, which you totally should not do.
No, you shouldn't do that. Bad news.
And cars are getting more connected and giving us more distractions. But you're going to have to give up owning a car and controlling that car, because that transition period where people still own and drive their own cars is going to be havoc for AVs. So the scenario that you pose, get a sleeper car and sleep from here to St. Louis, so you can rest and then you're ready for your meeting or whatever. That assumes that that the corridor you're in is safe,
right?
And it won't be if it's mixed with individual piloting their own cars. And so that means we've got to dedicate the space or restrict car ownership.
And that's not going to happen.
And we don't even restrict space for buses and streetcars. Who the hell thinks that we would, make an AV travel lane all the way from here to St. Louis, let alone build a Hyperloop, when, you've got all these rural interests that say, well, if you're sleeping from here to St. Louis, you're not getting off in Kingdom City to buy a soda and generate sales tax for my city.
Yeah.
Or buy gas, So that's part of the transportation conversation that I think that people who are in technology sort of forget about. Yeah. There's a lot of nuts and bolts policy things that are completely being ignored in the AV discussion at a technology level. I think the technology is almost there.
Yeah.
There's a huge concern I have with autonomous vehicles with energy use and recognizing things like pedestrians and cyclists.
Yeah. I'm scared about them making a choice. Like having to make a choice. Like we're going down the street and it's the I think I listened to a podcast about it, like the trolley problem.
Oh, yes, the ethical.
Like you turn to the left and you're going to hit somebody, but if you turn to the right, you're going to save. Or you turn to the left, you're going to hit somebody, kill them, but save the driver. Or you turn to the right, but you're going to kill the driver and save that person.
We won't answer those questions in advance.
No,
I mean,
that's like the scary part about it, because you're like, not only is it totally out of my control, we're talking about something that is completely, it's affected by so many other factors that are beyond its control.
Right.
And that's the part that I think about.
Yeah. I mean, as Americans, we tend to react. We're not a proactive culture. And so, someone will have to be killed or maimed and probably multiple times before we say, okay, here's the policy that works. Here's how we're going to ensure an AV. Here's who's responsible if there's a crash. Here's who should die in this scenario. I think we tend to overplay that particular scenario a lot, because I think you just value human life and period, and work from there, and versus picking winners and losers there. But I mean, it's a thorny issue, and it unfortunately is clouding the conversation about public transportation because people can't see that there's still a geometric benefit by moving large groups of people in large vehicles that take up relatively less space compared to everyone driving a car. So imagine the future, and this is the hell scenario that a lot of people have been talking about with AVs, is because if you buy an AV, right, and it really is autonomous, it can go out on its own without you and pick up a pizza.
Yeah.
Would you do that? Everything about human history, or U.S. human history, I should say, says you would sit on your couch streaming Netflix while the AV goes out, picks up your pizza, or and then so that's 2 trips without a person in it. That's not very efficient at all, especially for a very large vehicle like a car, right? So, I mean, the only way we can justify all these cars on the road right now is that there are people in them, and you're going to places and participating in the economy and generating wealth and all that. But what wealth is being generated by a 2-ton steel box with a 5 gigahertz cellular connection using like crazy amounts of fossil fuels, and the amount of energy and information to go from here to the Papa John's and back for an $8 pizza?
Yeah.
That was made with really crappy ingredients. I'm going to slam on Papa John's there. And
that's okay. You can slam on Papa John's.
And like how is that good for the economy or the environment or humanity even, right?
So then let's take that scenario and let's up it a little bit. And let's say that it's not just a delivery vehicle. Let's say it's like a
delivery vehicle would be good.
Let's say
because that's making probably multiple trips in the it's making multiple deliveries in the same trip.
Why isn't it? It's a pizza food truck, and it goes around, and the guy just sits in there. He could make pizzas in his truck,
and it would deliver Papa John's,
and it would
that's actually efficient. Yeah.
So that would actually go around. So like that would be something that you're kind of like, whoa. Not only does that take away, there's space that's not going to be used for a Papa John's now. So there's that building's not going to be used anymore.
Right.
You got the thing on the road now delivering pizzas, like a mobile autonomous vehicle food truck that's going around. So I call in my order, and then one of these guys, he's making my pizza fresh while the car drives to my house.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't end though. Like there's multiple on top. Like, yes, I agree with you. Yes, like a small delivery vehicle, but at the same time, if you could up that a little bit and say, wow, what if it was just a completely mobile restaurant?
Yeah, both of those
drove around?
scenarios are very possible.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing is, you know, with children, right? With people with kids, everyone's got like 15 activities, right?
Yeah.
And so most of the problem with families in public transportation is they say, well, I have to take my daughter to daycare at X, and then Billy has to go to soccer at Y, and then, you know, Sally has to get, you know, flute practice, like in Excelsior Springs.
Right.
And so they build these really complicated travel patterns that can't be served by anything other than a car.
Yeah.
So in the case of AV, if you can put Sally in a trusted AV to send her to her flute practice, you know, that's 2 trips carrying like a child. Is that like, would people do that? I think they would.
I think they would too.
Yeah, if it was like a Fisher Price branded AV service or something
was
that
a
you
Barbie-mobile.
could know you could trust it, right?
Yeah.
Or it was like, you know, Good Housekeeping, you know, seal of approval on the AV. You could put your kid in this vehicle by his or herself and send him off to a appointment. Like, so think about if you did that at scale.
Yeah.
Everybody had access to that because it's autonomous, so it's relatively cheap. What does the city look like when all these things are going back and forth and generating all these new trips that are maybe sort of pieced together today by a private car, or that maybe people walk to or use public transportation? And so anyway, the point is you're generating so many more trips that the city becomes more clogged, even with the same amount of people in it. Yeah. That's the sort of hell scenario that I think, if you look at human history, you know, we tend to be lazy and, you know, pick the path of least resistance. And if the pizza can come to us, you know, and not have to go get it, I mean, that's why pizza delivery is a thing, right? And who cares if it's an autonomous vehicle generating a lot of, you know, excess congestion?
Yeah. It's
all right.
Crazy,
back to Streetcar.
Crazy. Here's what we're doing. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back here on the Kansas City Podcast. Ding ding. That is my impression of the streetcar. Ding ding. Hey, it's not very good, but hey, I hope you're enjoying today's episode here with David, learning a lot about streetcar and public transportation and the amount of work that went into making that happen in downtown Kansas City. In speaking with David, I feel like I learned more about the streetcar and about that world of how something like that comes to be than probably anyone else or any newspaper or anything else that I've ever read. So very enjoyable. I hope you're enjoying it as well. Want to send a special shout out once again to our friends at Taco the Town, who, you know, we've gotten some new listeners from Taco the Town, and we welcome you with open arms here to the Kansas City Podcast. Definitely check them out. Check out the episode I was on. It was a lot of fun. And now let's talk some more streetcar. What do you say? Back to the show. Welcome back to the Kansas City Podcast. Cole, along here with David Johnson, our streetcar advocate, which we talked a lot about transportation in the first part of the show.
We did.
And I feel like we covered a lot of bases. But there's one specific streetcar question that I have.
All right.
And I need you to spread some light on this for me.
Okay.
Why does the streetcar have buttons to stop when it's automatically going to stop at every... Does it automatically stop at...
No.
It doesn't.
Yeah. So the buttons are there. They're very functional. So
Okay, I didn't think they were.
Yeah, that tells the driver who's, you know, up in the front behind a door, you know, stop the next stop.
Okay,
Yeah.
but it won't stop. It'll only stop at the stop. It's not just going to stop anywhere.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
That-
I mean, pretty much all public transportation
Works that
except,
way.
like light rail and heavy rail sort of operate that way. So you tell the driver, I'm going to stop.
hit the
On
button.
the buses here, you pull a little chain or string thingy, and then on the streetcar, you push a red button.
Okay.
That says stop on it.
Okay, so I was under the impression that the buttons didn't matter because I thought that the streetcar would stop at every stop no matter what.
PSA, the buttons matter. If you don't push the button and there's no one else on board, the streetcar operator will not stop.
Okay.
Yes.
I learned something new.
And you're mostly going to see that during lighter loads like mornings and evenings during the week.
Yeah.
On a Saturday, it's going to stop everywhere because
Right.
there's people everywhere now. But yeah, I've been on it many times when it just sails. And actually, that's really awesome because your trip's faster.
Yeah.
Or it actually isn't faster because it has to stay on a schedule. But
It feels faster because you're just flying through.
in the dead of winter, you appreciate it not opening its doors every, minute and a half.
How many streetcars are there?
4.
There are 4? Do they have names?
No. They have numbers.
Okay.
I resist the naming thing.
You just took like a giant deep breath.
Yeah,
why
because
would you
people have
name
asked.
it?
They're like, "Why haven't we named the streetcars?" I'm like, "I don't know. We named the streetcar like brushing thing, right? It's Brushy McBrushy Face.
Oh, okay.
That brushes the tracks off of snow and ice. That's about it.
Okay.
That's where we're stopping.
What's just one other quick streetcar question. What's the thing that when you were working on all this, what was the thing that caused you like the most stress when you were working on it? Was it like trying to get everyone together or gathering the money? Like what was the thing that you were like, oh man, if we can get through this, but it's driving me insane?
I think it was the election piece because you never really know. I mean, I say these elections were slam dunks, but like at the same time, you never really know because when you look at past voting history, it assumes that there's X amount of people participating because there are Y amount of opponents, right?
Yeah.
So if the X is lower than Y for whatever reason, then you could lose, right?
Yeah.
So you struggle with making sure that people don't get overconfident that they don't participate.
Yeah.
And so that's always hard for me, and I always stress. In fact, 2012, when we were doing the downtown election, I gave myself a panic attack because a lot of the groundwork was personally on me.
Yeah.
For some silly, crazy reason, the mayor and some other people said, "Oh, you go run the ground game." Person who's never run an election. I mean, part of it would be hard to lose.
Yeah.
And the other was I said I'd do it for free. So and all of my work on Streetcar has been volunteer. So labor blah blah blah. So. It was so watching that unfold over 14 weeks, twice in 1 year.
Yeah.
And then all of that being on my shoulders, from the making sure people participate. And then I went and became a public notary to notarize people's ballots.
Yeah.
And then it was, in retrospect, it was one of the greatest experiences ever. But man, it almost killed me because it was just so stressful. And I hadn't been personally responsible for something that significant in a while. It's
all on you, David.
Yeah. So so I, when people say, "Oh, we wouldn't have the streetcar without David," what I did most crucially was, corral support downtown and make sure that first election happened. There were so many people doing all the other stuff. I mean, engineers. People like Tom Guerin, who's making sure the trains run on time and everybody's safe, and the mayor, who's got the big megaphone out there, making sure everybody knows that we're doing a good thing. So I mean, it's a contribution, and I really, it almost killed me, the election.
Speaking of killing, I have a question about liability because I assume that at some point everyone was sitting around and they were like, "Hey, if we add this, the streetcar may accidentally hit somebody, or somebody may jump in the way of the streetcar." Has anyone been injured yet? I know that's a silly question, but it was brought up. It was brought up on one of the previous shows where I think this is what triggered actually you coming on the show today, because one of my guests was like, "Hey, all these cities that have streetcars all over the place, they know that there's a chance that someone's going to get hit by a streetcar."
No one's been killed by the streetcar.
Okay, perfect.
So first and foremost,
that's what.
we'll put
great.
that out there.
All right, put that out there.
Now,
but you got to have statistics and things to say. If we add this streetcar, there are chances that something bad might happen.
Well, so I'm trying to think of how I can, because I'm not as in the weeds on this as some people might think, but there is insurance for the streetcar.
Okay.
It is insured like a railroad. Okay. Right? Because there is actually no this kind of thing is a small enough market that there's not some big insurance market for streetcars
Right.
in the street, right?
You wouldn't believe the insurance market for
Yeah,
streetcars, man.
and so because it's not being operated by the city, we had to go get private insurance, and so they treat it like they wrote a railroad policy.
Okay.
And that assumes that basically a large freight train is running through the city, right? And so I think it was more expensive than we thought it would be.
Yeah.
But then it sort of like was, okay, well, that's just the cost of doing business.
Yeah.
But yeah, no one's been killed. This is just a tough question.
No.
'Cause
I'm before we move on to the Casey quiz. I had to give you one tough question.
So I mean, first and foremost, this is sort of a pivot, but forgive me.
That's fine.
Is you're always safer on a vehicle piloted by a professional than you are piloting it yourself, mixed in with all the other like amateur drivers that are distracted and running into things all the time.
Okay.
Meaning, driving your own car is less safe always than being in an airplane, on a passenger train, or in a streetcar, or on a bus, right? So things do happen, and a lot of it's people running into the streetcar. So
Okay.
I think that's happened like 2 or 3 times.
Okay.
And fantastic errors in judgment, I should say, because like this one, I think it happened at Truman in Maine, and the kid claimed he T-boned the streetcar, disabled it,
Yeah.
and claimed that he didn't see it coming. All right, so these are big. You've
Yeah.
been on the
I've
streetcar.
been on the
It's
streetcar.
kind of hard not
It's
to
like
see it
3
coming.
long
It's
cars.
got lights
Yeah.
on it. There's a big overhead wire. There's tracks in the street, and signage and all that stuff. So, and I think he even claimed that maybe he had a green light or something like that. Anyway, he ran a red light and T-boned the streetcar, and then lied about it to the reporter that showed up. And then later you get all the footage because the streetcar's loaded with like 8 cameras.
Yeah.
And then every intersection on the streetcar route has its own cameras.
Yeah.
So there's footage galore from every angle every time there's a crash, and even if a streetcar's not involved. And so, they were like, dude, you ran the light, and you just plowed into a $4 million streetcar, and your insurance is paying for it.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Hey, do you want to take a Casey quiz?
Yeah.
All right. All right, David, you know how this works. I'm going to ask you Kansas City related questions. You will be rewarded points.
Okay.
If I ask you
Can
a
I
question,
redeem those points for something?
you might
a
be
free
able to.
podcast?
If possible, yes. This podcast is free. You
Okay.
can subscribe.
Right.
If you don't like a question, you can always say stupid question. And remember, folks, you can tweet us at Kansas City Pod if you would like your question added to the Casey quiz. David, we always start with this question. It's the most popular question. So you got to start big, right?
Okay.
Your favorite restaurant that is not barbecue?
Affair.
You're the second person that said that in
Yeah.
the last couple
it's
weeks.
a really good restaurant.
Yeah. What's your go-to meal there?
They have seafood risotto that they've had on the menu for a long time, and it is, man, it's so good.
Going Affair. Are you a
Yeah.
barbecue guy? Do you have
No.
favorite barbecue?
No.
You're not a barbecue
No,
guy.
I am as close to being anti-barbecue as a Kansas Citian can be.
Wow.
I don't care about the topic. I think it's silly that we debate burnt ends when there's so much more food going on in this town than a couple chopped pieces of beef smothered in sweet sugary sauce.
5 points.
Thanks.
Well done. What's the one thing in town that everybody should try once?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. A couple different ways you can look at this question. Like, let's say you had friends coming in out of town. You're like, I want to show you
Oh, the
something
World
out-
War I Museum.
Okay.
Yeah, because it is probably the best museum in the region, like if not one, in the U.S. It's
Yeah.
really well executed. It's a topic that people have almost completely forgotten about, World War I, and it was a huge impact to our country.
2 points. Well done. Favorite local hangout?
Mildred's.
Mildred's,
Mildred's
okay.
in the Crossroads.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm there every single day. So just by nature of that.
You're there every day?
Yeah. I'm a big coffee shop person.
Okay.
I like everyday coffee shops. I don't, that's what Mildred's is to me. It's a very approachable, I don't think they even do pour overs. Like it's, and they're open all the time, and they're not like pushy Christians or So it's. I'm getting really into that territory here, but it's a really fun, easy, great food, and they make my Olé perfect. Cafe Olé, it's my go-to coffee.
What are the things on top of Bartle Hall?
They're sky stations. It's an art installation. I don't remember the artist's name, but they're actually functional pylons that hold the structure up over the freeway. And then the little pieces on the very, very top are public art. And that was required by our 1% for Art program, that every public structure has to have 1% of its budget dedicated to public art.
You have given the best ever answer on that.
You can see them out my window.
I'm giving you 10 points on that one.
Awesome.
Because
Awesome.
we've got space stations. The one that looks like a hair curler.
Yeah.
They're
actually.
well done.
Can I earn extra credit?
Yeah.
The same design is sort of echoed inside the convention center. Like there's some space age looking light fixtures and things. So it's kind of all over throughout the facility.
Very well done. Very nice. I ask everybody this question, and this one is going to be extra important to you. More Streetcar?
Yes. So
I already know the answer, but I had
mentioned,
to.
Hell yeah. And then beyond UMKC and the riverfront, that's up to everybody else.
You got what you wanted.
I got what I wanted. The core.
Sharks. Are they dinosaurs?
God, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
Are they, you got to guess?
I mean, they're fish, right?
Yeah, but they've been around for millions of years.
They don't get cancer.
I don't know.
They don't get cancer.
Oh, they don't?
That's why
Okay,
sharks
okay.
are like such curiosities, because they're like the
So
only
then if
living
they've been
being that
around
don't
for
get
so
cancer.
long, are they dinosaurs?
Probably.
Okay.
I mean, birds are dinosaurs.
That's a good point. What is your feelings on the Kansas City airport?
So I was one of those that was indifferent to a new terminal and
Okay.
then said, I'm all in.
Okay.
And so I changed my position. I mean, it was sort of a soft, pivot. But yeah, to me, it was like, oh, hey, it works.
Yeah.
We've got everything to spend our money on. And then when they made the case, and then the airlines, whom you need to have a functioning airport.
Yes,
There's
true.
no airport without airlines, right? And they all said, build us a new airport and we're going to pay for it. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
easy.
All right, transportation follow-up on this. Will there be a train, a light rail, that goes from the airport to down Kansas
It is
City one
so
day?
far away, 20 miles. So just do the math. So we said we built downtown for $50 million a mile. Extensions now are going to be 65, maybe 70 million a mile. So the airport is 20 miles from downtown.
Yeah.
So unless you're just building a streetcar from like Zona Rosa to the terminal,
Yeah.
which still would cost you a lot of money because it's like 3 or 4 miles. No.
No. It's not going to
Buses,
happen.
buses to the airport. Believe in buses for long distance because they are inexpensive, and especially when you're going through all that suburban stuff in the Northland.
You get to pick one. Worlds of Fun, the zoo, or Schlitterbahn?
Oh God, the zoo.
The zoo?
I do not roller coaster and I do not water slide.
You do not roller coaster, you do
Yeah.
not water slide.
So
You're going the zoo.
Zoo. I'm going the zoo.
Okay.
Even though I'm not much of a zoo person.
Bar chart, line chart, or pie chart? I'm sure you had to look at a lot of
Bar
those.
chart.
Oh, bar chart.
Bar chart.
Okay.
Yeah. It's easier to compare data sets, side by side with bars than it is lines. Lines, yeah. Anyway.
1 point. What's Kansas City missing? What do we need?
A regional transportation system that's regionally funded.
Wow, I didn't see that coming.
Right.
All right. Here we go.
Is that 0 points?
I'm thinking about it still.
Okay.
All right, we've got 2 questions left here. Is it pop or soda?
Neither.
What is it then?
Water. I'm going to drink some right now.
Final question. It's time for the Google challenge. Okay, so here's what I've done. I went onto Google and I typed in a word or phrase, okay, and I let Google do the autofill. So
Oh,
I need you
yeah, I
to
love
I
that.
need you to
Yeah.
guess the autofill on this.
I'm actually obsessed with this on my phone every time because I always pause and I look,
Mm-hmm.
hey, what's it autofilling?
Okay, so hitting with the theme today. I wrote in public transportation
Oh God.
is public transportation is what? Complete the autofill here on Google.
I'm actually terrified of what the actual answer is. I have a sense that Google says slow
Okay.
or smelly.
Okay.
But I'm being very pessimistic. So those are my guesses about what Google would say, not what I would say.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to show you here. The first one is public transportation is for losers.
Oh, it's just as bad as I thought. That's worse.
The second one, public transportation, is bad, but the third one should give you a little bit of hope. It says public transportation is important.
Yeah. So it's important for losers. It's important for bad losers.
Yeah. So how can you get the important up higher? Why do you think people are saying for losers?
I wish I had an answer for how to make public transportation aspirational.
Yeah.
And that's why I think people tend to say they'll support it but don't use it.
Yeah.
And it's also why you see lower income communities that are now abandoning public transportation because they're being given really bad auto loans and they're not coming back.
Yeah.
So that's I think it's just a quality of service, actually. So if we offered more frequent service, I don't think people would think that the same way. Because there are cities where riding the bus is very normal. And actually, we don't have this problem doesn't exist outside of the United States.
Yeah.
It's very much about us. And I think you could tie it to, the story about racism in America, because our story about public transportation and segregation is unfortunately bound together. And that's not the case in other parts of the world. And so then that comes like social and economics and all this other stuff. I am really rambling, but I
You're
feel
doing
like it's solvable with good service.
Got it. Let me tally up your points here. You did really well.
Okay.
You are at, I carry the one, 43 points.
Yay.
Well done. Congratulations.
Yeah.
We'll put you up on the leaderboard
Yeah.
online.
Is that really good? Like,
Yeah, I think it's
speaking?
good. Yeah. I mean, we've had a lot of guests. I can't keep track of all the points,
Okay.
but 43 is
So
really
there's
good.
not really a leaderboard.
No, it totally exists. David, thank you so much for taking the Casey quiz.
Thanks, Cole.
All right, David, we are nearing the end of our time today. It's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed this. We've talked about a lot of different transportation-related things, the streetcar. We talked about self-driving cars. We kind of covered the full gamut of transportation. It's been very exciting, and I appreciate you
even squeezed in the airport.
Yes, that's right. So this is now your time to shine. This is your time to give your plugs, tell people if they want to find you, or if you can tell them how to support the streetcar, and give your final pitch on streetcar stuff. This is your moment, sir. Go ahead.
So I obviously love talking about this topic, and
Yes.
best to engage me on Twitter. I am at KC Light Rail. I also run the Streetcar Neighbors fan page, I guess you could say, on Facebook, and what else? I'm on a couple different boards. So if you're interested in public meetings, about public transportation, stop on by. But the plug I'll give for streetcar specifically is the election is happening. So if you live between the river and 53rd Street, State Line, and Campbell, you are eligible to vote in the final election that will make the streetcar extension to UMKC happen. It is critical that you participate. Democracy matters. Voting matters. Elections have consequences. Blah, blah, blah. Get out there, vote. We tried to make the process as easy as possible. Ask a question. How do I get a ballot? Fill out the ballot application. I'll bring it to you. I'll fax it for you. I'll do everything it takes to get people to participate in this mail-in election that will seal the deal for streetcar extension.
Very nice. Mail-in election. That's weird.
It's cheaper.
It's cheaper that way?
It's like half the price.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I'm always used to like going to the polls. I think it's interesting.
So what's interesting is there are entire states now that conduct elections by mail. Oregon is one of them.
Okay.
They get better participation. You have more time to think through all the questions.
Good point.
That you're being asked. There's some heady topics on the ballot. So earlier in April, you walk into the voting booth, April last year, and all of a sudden you're being asked to support $800 million in debt issuance, and your property taxes go up. Oh my God, what do I do? Right? So thankfully, most people educate themselves in advance. But if you get the ballot in the mail, you have time to think,
read through it.
Maybe I'm going to talk to my elected official and say, this ballot language says, 20 years. Is that do we really need 20 years of debt? That kind of thing. And how much is my property tax going up? So instead of like doing all that in advance and having to know the election is coming, you get the ballot and you're like, wow, I have time.
Yeah.
So once people get their streetcar ballot, because right now we're just in the application phase, you'll have, I think it's like 4 weeks to make your decision on yes or no. Do you want to extend the streetcar? Do you want to help pay for it?
Yeah.
So, that's comforting to me, and I always remind people that it's just a 14-week process.
Yeah.
So if you haven't made up your mind yet, you've got time. We're not going to rush you, and we're going to help you participate.
Very nice. Remember, folks, you can find us at theKansasCityPodcast.com, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook at Kansas City Pod. And, of course, you can always follow me on Twitter at Cole Limburg. David, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks again.
This has been fantastic. We will see everyone next time here on the Kansas City Podcast.